Huh? What?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Okay, breath. Much to say about this, seeing that it's the most essential part of our lives. Inhaling, exhaling, and doing that. I was in New York maybe about a year ago, and one of the members of my New York workshop was all nervous because she had gotten a bad report from the doctor about the possibility of her having had her cancer return. And she had to go in for a second test. And they scheduled the test for about 4 days after, she found out about it. And she was all worried and all nervous on the thing. And I told her, and you could feel the tension in her. I said, almost every meditation technique that I know tells you to learn to breathe, to be conscious of the breath, to keep going in and out. Inhale and be conscious of the air going in, and then conscious of the air coming back up. And she's an ex-nun, and I reminded her, that the Latin word for breath is spiritus, and that when you get the divine energy in you, it's Sanctus Spiritus, it's the Holy Spirit, So part of it is every time you inhale and exhale, there's that ability to be able to contact that spirit energy inside of us, which is basically what this poem is about, Breath enters carrying its long beam of air, building easily, steadily, every moment, something so solid I could swear it was I, but it's not. I'm the one who is carried out, who must learn to become pure air in the space I occupied, a temple to house, one of God's Latin names. When I enter again, I am a name within the name. I am radiant both going and coming. So that's that one. So the Latin name that's being referred to there is that.
That's the Spiritus.
Sanctus Spiritus. Sanctus Spirit. That's one of the Latin names for God, as far as I know.
Right.
So now the other thing is the sexual.
I was going to say, I thought this was a sexual poem.
Did you?
I did, when I read it.
You want to talk about it?
No. I want you to talk about it.
What makes it sexual for you?
The in and the out.
Huh?
The in and the out.
A lot of things going in and out that are not sexual, Joe.
The going and the coming.
Uh-huh.
And the temple to house one of God's Latin names in our conception. I'm thinking
I don't know what I'd say about that. It doesn't feel sexual in the way that a lot of the other poems to me feel sexual. I think it's well, I guess when the spirit world enters the and you sort of release yourself. That first swing of the first stanza into the second, that, and I could swear that it is I, but it's not. That move. You know,
Where are you? Oh, right.
right at the end
So
of that
solid,
first
I can
stanza.
swear.
There's a way in which all love situations are like that. In that it's hard to tell each other apart. You know, and it does end with the word coming, I'll have to admit, you know, which has loaded with sexual connotation.
Right.
You know, it's the quietest sex poem I've ever written.
Yeah.
So quiet I didn't get it.
Yeah.
You know, and I have some other poems in the book that I think is touch. I mean, there's plenty of sexual poetry in this book, but that one doesn't strike me as particularly sexual. Decreased libido due to medication in the Memory of Lilies. Yeah, it happens that sometimes you have to take medicine, you know. And this particular medicine I was taking was decreasing. One of the side effects was that it was going to decrease the libido. And it was more in the action of completion of it that was the problem. It wasn't the desire totally that was gone. It was the ability to be able to perform well. Yeah. Couldn't have put it better. But they can't see that.
Oh.
Thank God. Oh, well, spoke too soon. Anyways, and of course the lily becomes associated with all kinds of things, you know, Saint Joseph,
Right.
who's has to remain a certain. He was sort of like Christ was a kind of.
Right. He was celibate. I mean, according to Catholic teaching, right?
Yeah, he was. There was a certain decreased libido, just the fact he was involved with it.
Yeah.
And his color is yellow, by the way, yellow or gold, yellow, gold, brown area, right? Once I had a vision of a place where a flower had been, a yellow lily, and it had seemed so perfect and so perfectly placed among the other flowers in the bouquet that the air loved it, and loved it so well that after it was gone, long after it was gone, the air held its form. Even its scent was there, and a change of light. If you passed your hand through the spot, you could still feel something. When the air moved, the lily went with it. I know death is a part of this poem, for we have been given a glimpse of death, or something halfway to death, where the body survives whole and intact, but does not connect with your body, with the yearning you and I both long for. But I promise you I will survive. I will. Body and all. Though for a while we may not touch. When we do touch again, every atom will quiver. Every atom of our body will glow, and that old touch will seem like a nursery school kiss. I know the warmth I feel is real, and no matter where I go or how I move, you have been granted to me and are mine, as I am yours, beyond the memory of lilies. I like that poem. I don't read it enough. At readings, I don't really read that poem, but it's actually a good poem. I like that poem. So, what do you want to say about it? It sort of feels. I mean, it's a kind of, Thomistic poem, you might say,
What does that mean?
of or pertaining to Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, Thomistic. Okay.
Yeah. It's, you know, when he's talking in the Summa Theologica about the fact that there has to be, if Christ came to save humanity, and the definition of humanity is that it be both body and soul, rather than just soul. Just soul would be angelic, you know. Body and soul would mean to say that the body has to resurrect along with the soul. So he argues for the resurrection of the body through the necessity that what is human is both body and soul. And he wouldn't have saved humanity, he would have saved what? Some angelic part of ourselves or some separation of ourselves. So what he is suggesting is that there's always a sense of the body afterwards, you know. And you should be able to sense the person there, the totality of the person there. And what that sort of entered into the poem when I was thinking, I was sitting here and I had this bouquet of flowers on the table, and we had just thrown out the flowers that afternoon. I woke up in the middle of the night and I came down and I turned the light on, and it felt to me like there was that the flowers were still there in the room, you know. And so I just sort of like started playing with that image of the flowers still being in the place, like as if somehow they were taking up the place that they had taken up for the last few days before they had, you know, gotten, you know, rotten enough to have to throw out, you know. And so that, you know, and I started to sort of push the imagination on it in that first stanza a little bit. But then it also, you know, part of the reason, one of the other side effects from the medicine was the potentiality for insomnia, you know, at the time. So I was up late at night, and, you know, both of them, so the two things sort of like collided in my head, both with this quasi sort of dreamy-like feeling that the flowers somehow were still there, and sort of imagining them there, and then going into the image of what it was that even if the body is in existence and you're in love with this person, what happens to the body after death? You know, and is there a kind of sexual energy still there, a desire for the other person anyways, even though you can't act on it, because it's necrophilia to be screwing the dead. But, you know, so there had to be some interrelationship. The desire for the other person would exist also then, somewhere beyond death, was what was hovering around my weird little mind that night. And so the movement between the flower feeling like as if it was here, the remnant of what was pre-medication, still being there, but not in the way that it had been before, you know. And that sort of struck me as a kind of vision of maybe being in an afterlife at the same time. And I knew, you know, but then there's that, that fourth stanza that says, you know, and I promise you I will survive. I know I'm going to survive. I'm not even going to be taking this medicine for the rest of my life, you know. So I knew that I was going to get all of this back. That wasn't it, you know. But I must have been given some kind of glimpse, as I say in the stanza before. We have some kind of glimpse of death, or of something that is halfway to death, where the body survives whole and intact, but does not connect with your body. Right? So it's a love poem, right? Now this one I have no problem with saying there's a lot of sexual energy in it too, you know. But I promise you I will survive. I will. Body and all. Not soul and all. That one I was sort of sure of. But, or that's even traditional to think of yourself as having your soul on the other side. But what about body and all? There's still a lot of question about that situation. Though for a while, we may not touch. When we do touch again, every atom will quiver. Every atom of our body will glow, and that old touch will seem like a nursery school kiss. Little kids pretending. You know, before real kissing starts. You know. I know the warmth I feel is real. And no matter where I go or how I move, you have been granted to me and are mine as I am yours beyond the memory of lilies. So,
the third stanza, you do something that I don't see happen a lot, is you step almost out of the poem and talk about the poem while still being while still being in the poem. I know death is part of this poem. And,
I see.
And it works, so it's like you're stepping out of the poem while still being in the poem, I think, which is another symbol of death and afterlife. Because you're not a part of the poem, but yet you still are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of my favorite poems, which does that wonderfully well, is Hass's heroic simile, where he has, the tree being cut down by these. He's using the simile of, what it is that the heroic is about, and he has the image of the tree standing for the heroic, so that the masculine image of the heroic has been chopped down in the contemporary world. And then he has these two woodsmen come and chop up the major tree, this heroic energy, into little pieces, and then he gets stuck with this image, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And he says that the old man and and his uncle, because that's who the other guy is who's chopping
I've read
with
this
him.
poem. I have,
is just stuck, and they're waiting for him to do something about it. Yeah.
Right.
And he keeps moving back and forth between the movement of the poem, taking another step here and there in the poem, and then sort of stepping back. Or a Russell Edson poem called Edson's Mentality, in which Dr. Frankenstein is trying to create the monster, and when the monster comes in, he starts sending jolts of electricity through it, and he notices that the monster has just ejaculated, and he takes some of the ejaculate and puts it under a microscope, and he gets very upset because the sperm are dead. And the nurse pats him on the forehead and says, but doctor, don't worry. You're such a nice man. You know, it doesn't matter because this is just fiction. And he says, what do you mean it's fiction? And she says, look it, Russell Edson is writing this. Yeah.
I have to. What's the title of that one?
It's called Edson's Mentality.
I have to read that.
Yeah, Edson's Mentality. And she's, you know, and it's wonderful. You know, wonderful little twist in which he manages to remind you who's writing the damn poem, for starters. You know, so he takes you that one step of the creative energy being part of the poem, you know, in the process and sort of moving it there. And I think partially because I spent so much time, you might say, with those little poems, that when I got to this point, that I wasn't afraid to write a line like, you know, I know death is a part of this poem.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's when that line makes me feel like it makes the poem feel very fresh, like you didn't. It doesn't feel heavily edited. It just kind of flowed. And I don't know if the writing process was like that with this poem or not, but you know.
Yeah, my memory of it, and I'm not sure. I mean, I'd have to go back up and check. But my memory of it is that it came relatively quickly. I mean, it came relatively full.
Yeah.
Now, again, from this poem, I'd have to go back again and check to find out whether or not there was how much Robert, you know, had me play with it. My memory of it, this isn't one of them that got that, but I don't know for sure. You know. And there are some. I was in a kind of state, I remember, when I came down that night. It was almost like as if I was like in a hyper-consciousness when I came down the stairs. The fact that I could even still almost see the flowers on the table or feel the flowers. I literally ran my hand to where across the place where the flowers were, and it felt like as if it was almost like as if they were still there, you know, or they were so still visible. And of course the room, lilies are pretty strong, you know, can have a pretty strong aroma. And so therefore I think the room was still sort of relatively filled with the scent of it. But I was sort of like in this quasi-middle land, you know, when I came down the stairs, still a little groggy from sleep, still a little, you know, plus who knows what the, what the medicine itself was doing at the time. And then sort of like just the you know, early morning hour, chances are 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, which I wasn't used to waking up.
Was this like blood pressure medication or something?
No, it was just some, it must have been some kind of flu thing or something that I had that you know, would have done that. I'd have to go back and check, I don't know. All I know is that it was one of the side effects. The two side effects I can remember was insomnia and the decrease of libido. And of course, any male worth his salt wants to question before he puts anything in his mouth that's going to decrease his libido. After all, this is America, for God's sakes. You know. Let's do Indianapolis, huh?
Yeah.
This is a whole different direction, you might say. But part of the thing about the Indianapolis poem was that it was the only poem where I was assigned it.
Commissioned as the IMA, right? Is that?
Uh-huh. And that there was a Blake exhibit over at the William Blake exhibit over at the IMA, and I had gone over there. It was there in January, and I had gone over there this one day. That it was the first time I'd gone, and it was a little icy out. We had this sort of mist in the air that was turning to ice, and I decided to go to the IMA that day. Well, when I got over there to the exhibit, and it was a really good exhibit, I was the only one there. So I had the whole exhibit to myself, you know. Plus, I've always loved Blake. And Blake's, this was his illustrations of Job, the book of Job. And so I was in the room with them pretty much all by myself. One person came in at one point and sort of looked around rather briefly and then sort of left me alone again. And I was thinking about all kinds of things there, but part of it, the thing I was thinking of is Blake's willingness to criticize the society in which he was in. Not to say he didn't love that society, but he also recognized that there were weaknesses involved in it. And he had a poem called London that was in which he, you know, says that he's down by the River Thames, and he describes the Thames as you know, controlling the entire flow of the river, so it becomes it's chartered streets, he says. In other words, like they've been mapped out not because they are going that way, but because they were going to change the flow of the river so they would go that way. Mm-hmm. And then he brings up, you know, the people who are hanging around by the river, you know, and you know, and the soldiers down there who have been sort of dismissed by the government, and the prostitutes, etc. And I was thinking of the sort of the underside of Indianapolis history, with in the 20s and 30s that there was the state government was run by the KKK, or by major portions of the KKK, and yet nobody talks about it. And it was finally sort of discovered when, I think it was, he was lieutenant governor at the time. His secretary was found dead after being gang raped.
Who was? D.C. Stevenson?
D.C. Yeah, right. The Stevenson that is referred to in the poem, you know, and that, and yet at the same time, you know, one of the great glories of this city was that some of the best jazz and blues came out of this city. At one point, Indiana Avenue,
West Montgomery,
yeah, and any number of other people, because even if West Montgomery was from Indianapolis and lived in Indianapolis for a long time, but every major blues and jazz singer of the era would come here.
Pass through, yeah.
But even though this was happening, and they were in the bars at Indiana Avenue, you know, blacks weren't allowed in. So even though the whole thing was a black movement and some of the greatest music was coming out of it, you know, it wasn't particularly kind to the black situation. Then they raised that whole area, you know. So all of the whole history of that era, you can't go down to.
What's there now?
The best remnant of that whole thing is the Madam Walker Theater. You know, and it's where most of IUPUI got built was down around that area, you see. So there was no sense of preservation of one of the glory points that this city really had. It was almost sort of like obliterated from existence. And that combined with, you know, the negative side of it, seeing that nobody was talking about, you know, the government being as corrupt as it was during that whole period, sort of got to me. Plus, being in New England, coming from New England, I kept thinking of Salem. You know, we had our pretty dark period in life, but we've almost made it into a theme park. You know, just the opposite of raising it or of not talking about it. We talk about it all of the time. And I'm not saying that that was a perfect solution, because we almost make it into a toy up there, but at least it's there to find out about. The number of people who know the name D.C. Stevenson anymore in Indiana is relatively rare. You've got to find somebody who really knows Indiana history to understand it. Where Cotton Mather is still pretty much available to almost anybody in New England, you know. So part of it was that. And so this poem, unlike the other poem, took many revisions before I got it. Part of it because my own ego kept rising up, in the whole tone of the thing was way, way, way too superior, you know, on the thing, and which wasn't having the effect that I wanted. Not that I'm afraid of being superior. As a matter of fact, it happens on a regular basis, but it's not something I'm particularly proud of, nor do I consider it a high spiritual calling at the time, you know. So anyways, so it's still in January. I'm writing. I'm sitting exactly where I am now in this particular seat trying to write this poem, you know, and it's particularly cold as all hell out. It's gotten even worse than what it was the day I went over to the art museum. And so that January Janus, the two-faced god, which is that who January is named after, among other things, and he is facing both the past and the future. That's his job, to look back on the year before and look forward to what's going to happen in the future. So, but also being two-faced has its obvious meaning. Yeah. Enough said, let's get to the poem. Be out.
Sure.
You know? Indianapolis. It is so cold today, no one runs past my house to shave off a pound of last year's fat. They cherish every ounce as coating for the aching bones. It is late January, whose two-faced God looks to both the past and the future. And it seems right to me to worship anyone who gets me beyond the misery of the present. Then a wisp of steam comes out of my neighbor's dryer duct. It rubs against my window like a ghost that wants in. And I begin to pity steam and half think I'll open up for him when the next ghost rises and I swear I see a face I seem to know, and am startled to recognize Mad Willie Blake, Prince of the Eternal Present, come to check out our chartered streets. But no one in this city is mad enough to be out on a day like this. Only ghosts like you, I tell him. Maybe if you wander Indiana Avenue, you can find some of those brothers of jazz and fathers of the blues, We destroyed their haunts, but they're still there, just as in the old days, little praised and little honored, but persistent. Or some gust will carry you like Jesus to the top of the State House dome where D.C. Stevenson might offer you his Kingdom of the Klan for just a genuflection. Then, as if propelled by Blake's own voice, it is I who am transported to the Wheeler Mission, where men who look like ghosts and women barely alive vie for a meal. They were out all night. My heart sinks, and I hear old Mad Willie whisper, marks of weakness, marks of woe. And I remember those jazzmen hammering at the manacles of our minds had forged, and those blues riffs that formed from the cold their own long lines. But it was only when Blake's ghost refused to enter my house and took his place among the poor, I saw in the window pane a halo of ice around my breath, as if the cold itself were the holy place. Marks of weakness, marks of woe is part of the London poem. You know, as he takes a look at people's faces, you know, in London. So, those are 3 poems.
All right. Thank you.
Anyway, when Robert put it together, you know, again, he was seeing things in the poems that I was. You know, which is one of the reasons why you want a good editor. So, and he was putting them in an arrangement that was going to have a different kind of feel than I would have. And part of it is that I, you know, got locked more in what I thought the poem was and what it was that it was for me when I was writing it. But then a poem starts to go out into the world and take off its own in its own way, you know.
Did you throw out any poems? Did he ask you to suggest to take poems out of the book that you?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I might have sent him 75 or 80 poems, and there were about half of those that are in there. Mm-hmm. And then he asked me to send him up 3 or 4 more, because he felt there were some glitches in certain places, and did I have anything about this, or just send me up some more, we might be able to figure out something else. And you know, and it kept going back and forth for a while, and then he'd have me rewrite some of them. Mm-hmm. I think this last section doesn't work, you know, and he'd sort of cut it out. And about 2/3 of the time he was right. Mm-hmm. So he was a very, very interesting and good editor from that angle. Because he also made you see things happening in your own poetry that you never would have thought of. Mm-hmm. You know?
In specific poems, did he argue any points on poems, like how to change this or that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would sometimes even rewrite a line or 2.
In this one, was there anything?
Don't remember any. I'd have to go back and check. I still have his notes upstairs, you know. So I, you know, and you know, he'd send it back scribbled on it, you know. So I have those. So, you know, can hardly wait to. You know, I wish he'd hurry up and win the Nobel Prize so I could publish all of those things and become really rich.